Welcome. This is the Thursday, March 8th, 2012 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. And Jens, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The second item on our agenda tonight is the approval of the minutes. Are there any changes?
Yes, I have a change to the minutes. Under planning matters on page 7, the last paragraph should be changed to read, there was general consensus that attachment 10 be changed to show both small-scale and large-scale biofuel processing plants in Ag 1 should continue to be special exception permit use, not administrative approval. Got it? Any
commentary, questions? Is there a motion?
I'm sorry, where was that, Mr.?
That was what you had suggested during the last hearing, is that correct?
Right.
Specific provision? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Do we need a motion?
Do we need a motion?
Yes, you'll need a motion.
Motion to approve the amendment?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passes. The next item, number 3 on the agenda, is an item on consent. It is known as Spyglass. It's a request to replat the Spyglass Affidavit of Exemption project. First, I will ask generally of all fellow members of the Planning and Zoning Commission if they have had any ex parte communications with anyone that would enable them from making a fair and balanced judgment on this issue. Please speak up if you've had any such communication. Okay? And then, because this is a quasi-judicial item, if there is anyone who is going to give testimony.
Mr. Chairman, if I could here.
Yes.
This is a matter on consent, and you have the liberty just to ask the Commission if they would make a motion to approve the consent agenda, and if that is seconded and approved, we just move right on to item 4.
Great. Is there such a motion?
Move approval of the consent item as presented.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Motion passes. Thank you. Love that. Item number 4 is a public hearing known as regarding Bloomfield at Vero Beach. This is a request for reapproval of the Bloomfield at Vero Beach PD conceptual plan.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman Zimmerman. John McCoy with the planning staff, and I'll be doing the presentation. This is a request for conceptual special exception for the Bloomfield subdivision, and it is for reapproval of a previously approved application. This same exact project was approved in 2007, and it was approved as a special exception use. Normally, special exception use approval runs with the land. In this particular case, there was an explicit condition that sunset the approval after 5 years, and that's the point we're at now. That approval is sunsetting. The applicant said, we're still interested in the project. We'd still like to go forward with it at some time. We're not exactly sure when. We said the way to do that is you need to go back through and get it reapproved, and that's what they're doing. They're reapproving the exact same project. In this particular case, it will be, staff is recommending a 10-year sunset provision, so there's more time given the current economic conditions. So with that, I'd like to get to the process, and the process is the same as other special exceptions. They need to meet the specific land use criteria. In this case, it's the plan development criteria. We look at appropriateness and compatibility with the conceptual design. That's the reason they need to provide a conceptual design, so we can evaluate those components. There are 2 public hearings. This is the first public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Planning and Zoning Commission then makes a recommendation to the board. The board can either approve it with conditions, add conditions, or deny the request. If it is approved, it would eventually, as a preliminary plan development, come back before you all, either in phases or as in a whole as a phased development. So it would come back before you all at the preliminary plan development stage. The site is located on the south side of Oslo Road, west of 12th Avenue Southwest, and just north of 11th Street Southwest. And it's split zoned. The northern portion, just a little less than half, is zoned RM6, residential multifamily, and the south half is zoned RS6. And that's one of the reasons we took it through the special exception plan development process. Since it was split zoned, it wasn't a property that allowed itself to be developed as a multifamily project by right. This is an aerial of the project as it was approved in 2007, and again, it's the exact same project. Layout-wise, nothing changed. Only some of the dates have changed as far as the phasing goes. So this is an aerial of the project overlay, so you can see how it fits on the site, and the entire site is fairly heavily wood, and I'll touch on the environmental factors a little later. What I wanted to do here was illustrate that while the project hasn't changed, there have been changes in the area, and it's mostly on the west side of this project. And I'll go to the next aerial, and if you'll notice the west side, there are two new developments. One is Grace Woods, which is the residential development immediately west on the southern portion of the adjacent to the project site, and the other is a medical office clinic that's immediately to the west of the project and adjacent to it on the northern portion. So those are the changes that have in the area that have occurred since the project was originally approved, and I wanted to use those two aerials to indicate that. This is a slide of the conceptual plan. It is conceptual in nature. Again, it shows that split zoning, shows the preservation areas where there won't be development. The next slide just gives an overall of the project as far as the size, which is 23.5 acres, approximately 108 units, and that works out to a density of about 4.6 units per acre. And this is a townhome style development as it's proposed. The phasing plan, what you see in blue is phase 1, and that is really the majority of the units, 62 units. It includes the stormwater ponds, access to the site, utilities from there. Phase 2 is 26 units. It's also some access improvements, connection to 12th Avenue Southwest. And then phase 3 is 20 additional units. And I'll talk a little bit more about the phasing and with the access. What you see in the light gray is Oslo Road and then the portion of 12th Avenue Southwest that will need to be constructed to provide access to phase 1. The brown are the interior roads that will be constructed with the appropriate phases. The darker gray shading running north to south is the remainder of 12th Avenue Southwest improvements that will need to be completed with phase 2. It will tie into 11th Street Southwest, which is a paved street presently. Also, there'll be a sidewalk at the very south end. There's presently a sidewalk on the Grace Woods, and that sidewalk would then be continued along the frontage of this property on 11th Street Southwest. Next item is a stormwater. Again, it's conceptual in nature. There'll be 2 stormwater ponds, both constructed in phase 1. A conveyance system will be a series of catch basins and pipes that'll transport the stormwater to the retention areas where it'll be treated and then discharged to a pipe that's on the south side of Oslo Road. When we do plan developments, we evaluate what sort of public benefits there are in addition to what would normally be derived through going through the normal development process, and why it's beneficial for the county and for the public. In this particular case, there are increased perimeter buffers on the west and the south. There are increased setbacks on the south and the west. There's an increased preservation, certainly more than you would do with a single family, and 12th Avenue Southwest paving to improve connectivity, and then also the advance of the right-of-way dedication for 11th Street. This illustrates the buffer. It also illustrates those greater setbacks. This particular slide, there's the greater setbacks on the south and west, type B buffer. That'll by and large be preservation of native vegetation. On the north will also be a type B buffer that is also constitutes an arterial road buffer. There's a wall as part of an oak feature, and that wall wraps around to the entrance. And then going south, again, it's pretty much the preservation of vegetation with some supplemental vegetation to create that buffer feature. Would like to mention the environmental factors, and there are several. There are gopher tortoise on the site, and again, as we get further into the project, at the preliminary, there'll be more detail. We know there are gopher tortoise from the environmental survey. The applicant's going to relocate those gopher tortoise, and again, that permit will be required when they get closer to construction, and there'll be more detail about that when they do get closer to construction. They will be preserving the entire wetland that's on the subject site, and it's about a 2.5 acre wetland, and that's in the eastern central portion of the site outlined in blue on the slide. There is upland preservation, and it's primarily in those two buffer areas where the extra setbacks are on the south and the west. And then lastly, when they come in, we'll look at some of the larger trees and some of the tree clusters as far as micrositing the improvements on the site. And with that, I would like to get to the staff's recommendation. Staff does recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend the Board of County Commissioners reapprove the Bloomfield Conceptual PD with the conditions as outlined in the staff report. Thank you.
This is no change from what was applied for and approved 5 years ago by the County Commission and this commission as well.
Only the dates.
Only the extension.
I have a question of staff, if I may. Since you're extending this 10 years out, is there any way we can delay the excavation of the property in Phase 2 and Phase 3 until they're ready to develop it?
I think you could make a condition such that the land clearing in those phases doesn't occur until they're actually getting tied to their land development permit, which in most cases would be the way it would work, but you could make that explicit that that's the way you want it to work.
I would like to see that happen because I don't know why staff recommended the 5-year last time, but I would assume that the 10-year is because of the economic conditions right now. But if we're going to go out another 10 years, I'd like to see that a recommendation be added that we not excavate Phase 2 or Phase 3 until they're ready to pull permits.
You mean clear the site of the trees?
Mm-hmm. Were they planning on going in and putting infrastructure in there now at this time anyway?
As discussed, they were not, but again, those details will become more clear when they come in with the preliminary plan development, which will come back before this body. And at that point, given the economy, they could choose to move forward with all 3 phases or a single phase, or even pull back on Phase 1 possibly. So,
does anybody have a problem with holding off the clearing of the land until? Okay, well, then we'd like to add that as a recommendation.
So, John, they don't have any plans right now to develop?
correct. This is a conceptual plan development approval. The next step in this process is a preliminary plan development. That's a document that goes back to the technical review committee and then comes before this body, and you all would see that before it were to proceed.
So I can't imagine economically they would do that anyway. So I don't really have a problem with it, Don. I just, if they get a quote and all of a sudden they want to lump some infrastructure together, I guess they could come back and ask for relief. I mean, I don't know that it would really be a problem, but if they're going to be moving ahead.
Well, the only thing that they might have an issue with is the lake is in phase 1?
Both lakes are in
Okay, then
phase
that's not
1.
an issue then. You don't have a stormwater retention problem, you don't have a fill problem. You shouldn't have any problems with that.
It depends on where they're going to use it. Is any of that fill going into phase 2?
I'm not sure tell me what you're afraid of happening.
Well, when we did the South County initiative, we went down there and we approved a lot of plan developments, and the developers came in and they totally clear-cut the entire area and left nothing but dirt, and we had the same problem up at 510 and US 1, and a lot of complaints.
Yeah, and it can set bare for many years.
Yes, and that's just, pepper trees now will be abounding in the area, and the dust issues we had, and we had to make the developer go in and put grass down to keep the dust from flying around, and we had big piles of dirt that sat there.
I don't have a problem with it. I'm not sure I'd conceive of the need, but I mean, but that's fine. I understand. I remember South County very well, so
Okay.
I don't think it'll be an issue.
I have two questions. One is with the wetlands, the melaleucas will be removed. Will that be a one-time deal where they'll go in and clear out the melaleucas, or will those wetlands be maintained as those melaleucas reseed either vegetatively or from seeds up off of Oslo Road?
We have not got to that level of detail, and we will further, but typically with the environmental conditions, there is a monitoring condition usually in those environmental, with the St. John's permit, there's usually a monitoring condition, and I'm not sure how long that takes it, but there will be usually a monitoring condition that'll take it out a period of years, whether it be 3 or 5, I'm not sure.
And my second question is with the gopher tortoise, the gopher tortoises. I agree, and I'm looking at page 5, the bottom of page 5, the gopher tortoise paragraph, and I completely agree that relocation is the best method, but in the last sentence it says, in this case, the developer has agreed to relocate all tortoises to new locations within the on-site upland preserve areas discussed above. Now, those are the type B buffers that you're talking about. I don't think there's any evidence that those would support a gopher tortoise population, and I would much prefer to see the wording in that those gopher tortoises will be relocated to an existing gopher tortoise colony. I think that relocating them to those type B buffers, they're not going to inhabit those buffers. They're going to just take off, and I'd feel a lot better having those gopher tortoises removed to an area where there is an existing colony, and we know they have a chance of survival.
I think that can be a condition, but any condition needs to make sure that it's going to be consistent with the permit that's going to be issued with the Florida Fish and Wildlife. And they're really the controlling entity as to where.
I'd be very surprised if they buy off on locating them to a type B buffer. So I would defer to them, but I'm concerned about the wording as it exists now.
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, Stan Bowling, Planning Director, and I think, Mr. Day, that's the idea there. On condition 2D, as recommended, obtain a gopher tortoise incidental take permit from Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. If we ended the condition wording there, and we won't have a recommendation one way or other, they'll make the scientific assessment as to whether or not it can be supported. We'll actually go more generic with that condition. I think that would
I'd feel a lot better with that rather than the wording as it exists now, because I don't agree with the wording as it exists now at all.
Okay, so we can add to that it is recommended by the P&Z that it be off-site at another tortoise, to an existing gopher tortoise society.
I don't think that's what I heard him
Yeah,
say.
no,
I think what
that's
I heard
not
him
what I
say is that we're going to let the experts give us a recommendation, and we'll consider it at the appropriate time.
I think what I heard him say is that last sentence is going to be deleted.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I
Yes,
heard.
the parenthetical statement is eliminated.
Okay.
That's all he said.
And we'll leave it up to the agency's expertise as to what can be,
All right, so
what
that's
can
how you're
support
gonna-
the tortoises.
Yeah, I can live with that.
John, you just answered one question about that, and at the beginning, you said that the special exemption generally runs with the land. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that this time, you gave them a 5-year and a 10-year because of economic conditions? I mean, if we're looking out into the future, why wouldn't you just let it run with the land instead of putting a sunset on it?
That was my question.
The 2007, I think staff did the sunset because the economy was very hot at that time, and the condition was that they complete it within the 5 years. So we wanted to make sure that the plan was approved, was actually built, and that's a similar intent for this condition, but we want to give it more time. We want to make sure that it either gets built or it essentially returns to fallow ground with its original zoning, and that whoever else comes forward isn't essentially cluttered with this plan or bothered by this plan.
But let me tell you, that's back in 2007 or 2006 is when we started putting time limits on PDs. Before there was no time limit. And the reason I have a time limit is if a development project gets strung out and doesn't get built and the rules change in that time period, there should be a mechanism to implement the new rules. So that's why we put time limits in. You know, we have two flavors of PDs. It can be either a special exception or a rezoning PD. And the reason that this is different from most special exceptions are uses that are built right away. You know, a use that doesn't generally fit in a zoning district but would with certain conditions. So a PD is a special type of special exception that really warrants having an expiration date on it.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody have anything else?
Public hearing.
So this is a public hearing. Does anyone care to speak on this issue? If so, please come on up so you can be sworn in. No?
Do you want to speak, sir?
Yeah, can I ask a question? Is this regarding Bluefield application?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
No, I'm John McCoy.
Okay, so, do you want to speak?
I think I would like to speak.
Come on up. Tell us.
Thank you very much.
You-
I'm sorry I'm late. I'm coming in from Broward County. So my name is Michael Glessman. I'm representing the ownership on the property.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I'm sorry I'm late coming in. I actually passed the exit on 95, so I ended up in Sebastian. The MapQuest got me a little screwed up, so I apologize. I'm not sure where you are in the conversation, but I just wanted to say that I've been in land development probably my whole life. I'm representing the ownership of this property. They asked me to get involved with them right about the time the economy had gone down. And I said, well, obviously you're not going to develop at this time. We're just going to have to wait for things to improve. And with the fact of the matter is that things really don't seem to have improved a whole lot. We're optimistic, but in going through the paperwork on that they presented to me, I realized that there was a date that was never going to be met due to the economy. And that was at that time I started making calls and meeting with the county staff to find out what mechanism or what process we could get involved with to extend that development date, because the people that own this had great intentions, and obviously they've disillusioned as to being real estate investors. But at this point, we're hoping that the county could see fit to give us at least the time for the economy to improve, and hopefully if it improves over the next 12 or 18 months, we'll start pushing dirt around. But at this point, we think this was the best thing for us to at least, protect what we have had approved and be able to go forward in the future. So that was the whole idea. If, I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have of me, but, we think it's a great piece of property that eventually is, it'd be very nice to be able to build this thing out. But at least the investors that we have here are very substantial people, and it's not going into foreclosure. They have the deep pockets enough to hold on and wait this thing out. They're very determined to see it to an end. It's just the time issue. So if there's anything else, okay. Well, thank you for the time. I appreciate it, your consideration.
Hi, can you raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Do.
Thank you.
Your name and address, please.
Britt Stevens, Kimley Horn Associates, 445 24th Street, Vero Beach. I just wanted to speak to one comment that came up as far as limiting excavation on other phases of the development. I understand the intention there, and I certainly appreciate that. The one thing that I would just like to throw out there is, this is a conceptual approval and a conceptual plan, and there's a lot more engineering that needs to be done as we get further down the process. And when I get further down the process as far as engineering the project and understanding where I need to connect my utilities, I might need to run through those other portions of the site. I might not construct the roads and storm, but I might need to extend utilities and cause impacts in those other areas. And the same thing so far as the fill goes. The ponds are being excavated initially, and that's the owner would, I'm sure, more times than not, like to be able to use that dirt if he's able to use it for improving the future phases. And that might not be a wholesale clearing of the rest of the phases, but at least provisions that would allow them to go in and get a tree removal permit, designate certain spots within those phases so that they could stockpile and keep some of that dirt that they've excavated, so they're not coming back in 2 years, 3 years and having to pay an extra premium to haul in fill from off-site.
So how would we make, I guess we could just add that to the recommendation that they just impact the footprint of where they're installing utilities. I knew that there was going to be a problem with this. I knew there was going to be an issue with this because of those issues. I mean, so how do we work that out?
I think one possibility is just to have kind of a generic condition that a land clearing and tree removal be limited to the phase that's going to be immediately under construction. You all will actually see probably a revised phasing plan when they come in at the next step. And that phasing plan, I would assume, would accommodate where they might need utility corridors. And if possibly they need a stockpile area, that could be shown too in the footprint of phase one. So I think you kind of have a generic condition. They've got to justify the clearing area based on a phasing plan, and you'll see the details at the next step.
Can you live with that?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
With regard to that, at what point does this trigger? I mean, everything has a trigger, and I was a little confused as to, we've got the generic statement. Is it when he comes in for the?
Right. With the preliminary PD plan, which would be the next phase that you all would see, they would have done more engineering details.
So the generic triggers to rule, or the part of the rule that we have to deal with at the preliminary.
Right. In other words, the condition, if you put a condition in that land clearing and tree removal will be limited to phase, one phase at a time only, then that condition prevails at the next point in the review process. Then the question is, well, where is the appropriate phasing line? And that's what you'll figure out the next step.
I would suggest that at this point, I mean, we have the owner's representative here, we have the engineer here, we have the staff here, and the P&Z. I mean, everyone knows that we have a heightened sensitivity to this. Why don't we let the engineering get a little further down the road, understanding that this is an issue for us, and then get into the details of it at the appropriate time. This is conceptual. I mean, as long as everybody understands, we're going to be taking a close look at this because we don't want land clearing. It's going to, and then we have another downturn in the economy, and we have something like we have on 510. I think trying to put the specific conditions in right now, we don't have enough information. Let's send it back to the engineers, and they know it's something that's important to us, and make a very general statement about it right now.
That's why I was asking about the timing and what was implied. The generic statement, it can go either way. It's innocuous one way in the sense that it does put everybody on notice, so I don't have a problem with it. But I think I needed to know when it would trigger and to make sure that they have room to do stuff like he's talking about. Because I'm not in the development business. I'm not going to come back. I don't want him coming back asking permission or wavering this if they can leave their fill. I mean, they should be able to build out and do this as economically as possible. So
yeah. So either way, it doesn't have any bite until we see it again.
It's kind of. Yeah. I don't mind voting for it, but I don't see a big deal with this right now at this level. Yeah. At this stage.
We have a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Did you close the public hearing?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there anybody else that might want to speak? I don't know.
Public hearing is closed. So I'll ask again, do we have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion is second.
The motion is to approve the staff recommendations with the changes that were recommended, or?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to clarify the motion. The motion is to approve with what I heard were two recommendations. One was removing the final sentence of 17D, gopher tortoises, and the second one was to express generally our concern about clear cutting prematurely clear cutting prematurely. So is everyone in agreement that's the motion? Is there a second on that?
I'll second the motion.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All against? Motion carries. Item number 5 is a public discussion. It is quasi-judicial. It's Waterway Village. Devasta Homes LP's noticed a proposed change, request to modify the Waterway Village DRI Development Order Emergency Shelter Space Condition. And again, I will ask simultaneously, all of the members of the commission, if they have had any ex parte communications regarding this whatsoever, please say so now. Okay, seeing as how there are none, I will turn it over to...
Does the clerk want to swear the witnesses?
Yeah, swear. Anyone who will speak, please be sworn in now.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Waterway Village was actually presented to you all at the last meeting, one of the later phases. It is a DRI, Development of Regional Impact, which means that it is of a scale that it goes through a special process governed by state rules. We also have county rules that essentially have our Planning and Zoning Commission, you all take a look at new DRIs and proposed changes to DRIs. Under the state rules for DRIs, there are 2 types of changes. One is a substantial deviation, which is a significant change in some of the original conditions or the original proposal. Second is known as a minor change, which is actually the type of change that's proposed and is before you all this evening for a recommendation. The process is simply this. The application has been through staff review. We've been coordinating with the Regional Planning Council and people at the state. And once we receive your recommendation, we'll schedule a public hearing for adoption of the proposed change or adoption with changes or denial before the Board of County Commissioners. So your recommendation will go to the board. The overall development, I know you're familiar with the location, is located on the north side of 49th Street, east of 58th Avenue, over 700 acres, over 1,500 units approved, although they may very well wind up a little bit short of that. Their development plan as they build out might be more in the order of 1,400 or 1,450. The proposed changes to only one condition, and that condition relates to emergency shelter space. Back in 2004, when the DRI was under review, evacuation and shelter safety, of course, in the year 2004 was foremost on everyone's minds. And rather than the applicant do a detailed analysis, they just agreed to have a safe room or safe space within each unit. The type of construction they were doing at that time with poured concrete, it actually was economical for them to do, and I believe is probably somewhat of a marketing tool as well to have a safe space in each and every home. And that was the way they were going to mitigate any potential impacts they might have on public shelter space. You could shelter in place in the home. Fast forward now, they have different construction method. Having a concrete safe space within each home is no longer economical for them. Marketing may have changed as well. We'll also point out, as we said in our staff report, that the wind loading requirements for new residential units is going up. Next week, when the new building code goes into effect across the state, in this area, all newly permitted homes will have a wind loading of 160 miles per hour. So there'll be some pretty well structured residential units. The proposal is simply this: there's about 375 units completed to date. Each one has a safe room in it. The applicant is willing to continue the safe rooms in all the existing platted lots to finish out phases 1A, 1B, 1C, completely consistent with the existing development order and consistent with each other in those existing neighborhoods. Each one of those would have a safe space, 431 units. Beyond that, the proposal is to not provide any, and not be required to provide any safe rooms in each unit, and not have to provide shelter space automatically after provided on the site. And the reason for that is that we have a significant surplus in the county of shelter space right now for Category 3, 4, and 5 storms. This particular project is not located in a flood zone. It's not located in a hurricane vulnerability zone, so there are no state rules that apply, no state requirements. It's a local decision, and staff is satisfied with the applicant not having to finish out the last 1,000 or so units with a safe room. They'll be under the new code. There will be kind of a review mechanism, though. After every plat filed after 2015, the Emergency Services Director would take a look to make sure there's still a surplus of shelter space. If for some reason at some point in time there is a deficiency, the wording, proposed wording would allow the developer and the county to negotiate mitigation. And there are a number of ways that they could mitigate it, and those are listed out in the proposed condition. So there's a significant surplus, but there's a fail-safe sort of test after 2015 built into the proposed wording. Staff's recommendation is that the Planning and Zoning Commission, one, agree with staff that this request does not constitute a substantial deviation, and recommend that to the Board of County Commissioners. And second, that you all recommend the board approve the revised wording as I've described. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions that you might have.
I've got a question. And you mentioned it about not located within a hurricane vulnerability zone. Seems like to me the entire state's in that zone. I don't know.
That's a good question. There is a definition for that, as we learned from the state planners and attorneys several weeks ago. And that's essentially an evacuation area for Category 3 or lower. So that's, and this project is outside of that.
So this area does not have to be evacuated in the event of a...
1, 2, or 3.
Okay. Interesting.
To me, the salient, there are two salient facts here. One is that you've got an abundance of space now, and you're projected to have, based on population studies from the University of Florida, for a good long time.
Yes.
But what I'm frankly more swayed by is that we're now building to the 160-mile-an-hour wind thing, which is a happy accident, I'm sure, for these guys, but I'm willing to give them full credit for it. I mean, that's a very important, that's a big deal.
That's a big deal.
Right.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, if there's no flood or water...
I mean, this is a life safety
yeah.
issue in many ways, and going from 140 to 160 is a big deal. Does the applicant, any other questions of staff before I ask if there's any, does the applicant wish to have anything to say about this?
Yes, I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Attachment 1 that we received in our packet is the revisions to Condition 72. So you have the old 72 struck out, and the new wording for 72 appears as Attachment 1. Am I on so far?
Yes, that was the original proposal from the applicant, which is no longer the proposal.
Oh, this is no longer in the proposal?
That's correct.
So going to Attachment 6, is that what's in the proposal
That's
now?
correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Which is, yeah, and I think I noted on, yeah, if you look at the very first page of Attachment 1, down at the bottom, it noted that the proposal was amended by a second submittal.
Okay.
And thereafter, we could note that on every page. I realize it's confusing, but I did need to put in the original request, because that's got the applicant information on it. But that's, yeah, to make that clear, that was an older proposal that's no longer what is now being proposed.
Any further discussion?
I had a question similar to the hurricane vulnerability zone. Is on the issue of flood insurance, it also states it's not in a flood zone, but again, the peninsula of Florida is mostly in a flood zone X. So, can you elaborate on that?
This isn't a flood zone X.
Okay.
Right.
Any other questions, any other discussion? Do we have a motion?
So the motion would have to include both of your, can I just?
Just the recommended condition is kind of twofold. One is about it not constituting substantial deviation. The other is to approve the proposed wording.
That's necessary because it's a DRI.
Right. Okay, I'll move that the county commission, that this go to the county commission, that it's not a significant deviation. And what was the second part?
This one right here.
You don't have to build out space.
Oh, yeah, that adopt a resolution that contains a proposed amendment to Development Order number 72.
Second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. I asked the applicant if they wanted to come up and speak. They said nay.
Go. Wisely chose not to speak.
Does anybody have any, we're on to item number 6. Does anybody have any commissioners' matters? I have something on my mind, but does anybody else have anything they would like to discuss? The thing I wanted to kind of get the consent of my fellow commissioners about, I was thinking about the meeting we had last time where we had to go over something that had been presented to us for the third time, and I sort of just shortcutted it and said, I assume you all have read it, and rather than have the staff give the whole presentation essentially for a third time, is it okay that if you have any questions, we just go straight to that? And that seemed to work pretty well, and I anticipate we're going to have several more of those coming in front of us this spring and probably into the summer, because we have a lot more sections of that to go. Is that correct, Stan?
I think it'll be different when we get to the formal hearings, which will be next.
I know, but we're not.
Discussion
We've got a few more discussions to go, correct?
No.
Is that the last one?
I think that's
the last one.
Okay, well, I was going to see if everybody was still in agreement that we don't even have to worry about that. So that's it. Okay, item number 7, planning matters.
The only thing I just want to bring up, it's pretty likely that we will not need to meet again this month. So we'll be sending out, when we know for sure, we'll, as we always do, notify you all by email.
Are we going to get paid or not?
Double what you get now.
Double what we get now, wow.
Right, double what you get now. But this may be the only, it's likely this is the only meeting this month. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
What?
So you have to do it. No.
Oh, got it. Okay, attorneys matters, Mr. DeBrawl.
None, Mr. Chairman.
We are adjourned. Thank you.